Hello and welcome, this is Mark from IndexJet, and in this video we talk about Serverlog analysis. So let's dive right in. The first question is, how often should you check your log files on your server? So the basic rule here is that the larger your website, the more often you will want to check your server logs. For example, for a simple 50-page website, which might be a local business website, you probably want to check your server logs once per month. Now, what kind of things do you want to check for in the server logs? You can check if all the pages that should be visited by Google have been at least visited once per month. So that basically means in order for Google to find new content, they need to visit your website with Googlebot and check out all the pages to discover the updates that you might have made to pages and to discover new content as well. So this is basically checking that Googlebot is coming to your website in a healthy frequency and crawling all of the pages. Beyond that, you also want to check for server status codes. We talk about those in more detail later, but basically in IndexJet you can see what status code Google discovered when it hit your website. For example, status codes could be 404 errors, meaning that a page was not found. And you can specifically filter for 404 errors in IndexJet. So you're basically reviewing which pages has Google seen on my website that did not work. And this is a good habit to get into, to check on a monthly basis, because there could be things on your website that you're not aware of. Somebody could have deleted a page, or a link could have broken. And that's why it's good to check for 404 errors. The other errors you want to check for are 500 errors, which means that it's a server status error. For example, if your server is responding too slowly, or your server is completely offline for a period of time, then you would encounter a 500 error. The issue with that is if Google is getting too many 500 errors, then Google will slow down the crawling and discovering of your website. This is mainly important for really large websites. However, it's still not a good signal to send to Google, because it's basically telling Google that parts of your website are not working and that your website is currently offline. And of course, Google doesn't want to show broken websites to visitors. So it's important to minimize the 500 errors that you have, both for user experience and for Google. And then you can also check for redirects. And see if those redirects were working correctly. For example, if someone ended up on a www version of your website, however, normally you're using the non-www, then you want the www to redirect to the non-www, and you can see that in IndexJet as well. So checking on 300 statuses, such as 301, which is a permanent redirect, is also a good idea to make sure all of the redirects that you expect to be there are actually in place, and Google sees those when Google comes to your website. So just a little bit more theory before we actually dive into doing a server log analysis. So we talked about what to check on smaller websites and how often. Let's talk 1,000-page website. So you probably want to check at least twice per month for a website with 1,000 pages. Mainly because you have a lot more topics probably that this 1,000-page website talks about. Whether it's an e-commerce website, you would have a lot more product categories, or whether it's a blog, you would have a lot more articles that talk about different topics. And you would again want to make sure that each of those categories or topics is getting crawled at a sufficient pace, and that Google is discovering all of the new articles. For example, if you're publishing 50 new articles per month, since you have a pretty big website, you want to make sure that all of these 50 articles have actually been visited by Google. And if you've made any updates to articles, that Google has also seen those updates. And we show you that in IndexJet as well. Now for a 100,000-page website, this is where crawl budget starts to become interesting, and check at more regular intervals, such as once per week would be a good idea to check your server logs. The problem with larger websites is that crawl budget can become an issue, which means that Google cannot find all of your pages in a sufficient amount of time, because your server might be responding slower as Google starts to speed up in order to find all of the 100,000 pages and crawl them, your website server might be starting to respond slower, which then in turn signals to Google that they need to slow down the crawling so that Googlebot will not take out your server. So it depends on what your server configuration is and how many crawls essentially your server can handle. But I've certainly seen it that Googlebot or other bots have taken down servers. And it's important to keep a track on that as to what your server response rate is. You can do that in Google Search Console and to see if Google has slowed down crawling because of your server response times. But yeah, on bigger pages, on bigger websites, it's definitely a good idea to look at crawl budget. And what then happens if Google does slow down crawling, then they won't get through all of the 100,000 pages, so they might get to 40,000. They then reduce the crawl rate and they never actually visit the last 60,000 pages of your website, which you could also see in the fact that they have not been visited by Googlebot inside of your server logs. Yeah, so this is the theory. Let's walk through and actually look at, for example, how to find 404 errors that Googlebot landed on in IndexJet. So we're jumping into a website here. And we're going straight to IndexJet, and we probably want to hit the Serverlog analyzer section in IndexJet. We've got an HTTP status filter here, so we can filter for either all 400 errors, or we can filter for specific 400 errors. So if we want to only look at 404s, then we can look at those specifically. So I've selected just 404s here. Now keep in mind this website has been hacked before. So Google still knows a lot of URLs essentially that are not legitimate URLs and visits those. So that's why we can see here that there's still quite a lot of 404s. However, if we also order this by the last Google crawl, we can see that basically today Google has hit quite a lot of 404 errors. So in case of these 404s, what we would want to do is basically select all of these visible 404s, because we can see these are not real pages. These were part of the hacked pages. In this case, we would set the index status to 410, making it so that if we open this page, it now says that this page has been permanently removed. And if we look for the HTTP status checker, we can also see that that page is now responding with a 410 status. So let's look at that. Here we can see at the very bottom, this page is now responding with a 410 status code, which is a gone code, which tells Google that this page has now been deleted. So it's better to show Google a 410 for any pages that have been hacked and you want to remove them from Google's index, because we're telling Google directly, hey, this page is no longer part of our website. Please remove it from your search results and also remove it from the sort of invisible index that Google has on every domain name, because we don't want Google to actually come back and crawl this website. And we also don't want Google to distribute link signals to these pages that are actually hacked and redundant and have been removed. So I would repeat this process here for any other recent crawls. So we can see here that on the 16th of, actually let's order this again by date. So we've done the first page here. Now on the second page, we can see here that on the 20th, Google has also crawled quite a lot of pages. So this is just 2 days ago. So again, I would take all of these and let's say select all visible. Have a look through first to make sure that these are not pages that are actually, real money pages or real content that you want to show in Google search results. But these all look like hacked pages to me. So let's also 410 those pages, set index status, set it to 410. And I think we got a confirmation there. So if we now visit this page, Yeah, that's also been removed. So this is how you check for 410 errors, and probably what you want to do to set those 404 errors, and you probably want to set the 404 errors into a 410 if you've removed the content for good or if it actually never existed. The reason for that is that if Google discovers a 404 error, Google doesn't know if this is a real page that will come back later. So in a short amount of time, Google will come back to check if this page is now online again and working. And this creates additional load on your server, which you don't want. So you can see the problem here because of these hacked pages. There have been 9,000 Googlebot visits within the last, let's see what the time frame here was. So we're filtering for, let's say, last 30 days. Yeah, there's been a total of 9,000 Googlebot visits essentially in the last 30 days. Oh no, 200 in the last 7. Okay, 7,000 filtered. So 7,000 Googlebot hits in the last 30 days, which is huge because this website only has 50 pages maximum. You can see that Google is coming back for all of these 404 errors. Now I'm purposely leaving some of these here because this is basically, my own testing website, and I want to have a couple of examples to show you here. But you can see the problem with 7,000 Googlebot visits. What this also tells Google in terms of a ratio is that basically you've got 50 pages working, so they return a 200 OK status. So these are our real pages. And then you have about, I would say of 7,000 visits, let's say you have 5,000 hacked pages. And because we've removed all of the hacked pages, they return a 404 status, 404 error. So this means that the page currently cannot be found, and Google will come back for those 5,000 pages. And basically how it looks like to Google is that probably 99% of our website is not working. So we can figure that out by going 50 over 5,000 is only 1% of our website is actually working, whereas 99% of our websites are returning errors. So this is obviously a huge problem in Google's eyes because, again, 99% of our website is not working, which cannot be a good signal to any search engine if that is the case, and you can expect ranking drops just if your 404 errors are really high, or if your server status is constantly 500, which is basically a server error. So yeah, that's the reason why we want to check for 404 errors. 500 errors, again, that's where your server had a problem. So it's not that the page wasn't found, it's that the server either was down or was responding too slowly. So we can follow the same process here. We would just filter for 500 errors. We're also explaining to you what the different 500 errors are. So we've got internal server errors, bad gateway errors, and gateway timeouts. So if your website is responding too slow, it would have been probably a gateway timeout error. So you can check here what the different status codes were. And on our website, we didn't have a single time where Google hit our pages and we had a 500 error, at least not in the last 30 days. So I've just changed the filter here. We're still on 500 errors, but let's look at the last 7 days. So no 500 errors in the last 7 days. Last 30 days also none. So only after that, we can see here in December we had some 504 errors, which also looked like they were for those hacked pages. If we check those hacked pages now, they're now a 410. So if Google comes back to this page, they would discover that these pages have indeed been removed. Cool, so those are 500 errors. Redirects would work in the same way. So we can come again to the status here. We look for 300 redirect, and we can see that what these hackers have done here is to create redirects on purpose. I assume they do it to make it harder to remove pages from Google SERPs, because the longer their pages stay indexed in Google SERPs, the longer they receive the benefit of link juice flowing to their pages. Whereas once we set those to 410, there's obviously no more link pointing to them. So basically that's what you want to look for. In this case, it's a bit hard to find real throw ones. We can check here for pages. So I haven't actually talked about this filter yet, which I probably should. So what we can do is we can also in the very top can filter for only pages or posts or categories or tags, for example. So what we're basically saying is, right, show me only those URLs that are actually pages that exist in our WordPress database. And because we have this filter on right now, we're saying, and they have had a 300 status code. So anything in this 300 would show. Let me see. So if we filter this, let's reload this 1 second. Okay, so we're going to say we only want to look at pages and filter for that. And then we set the number to 100. So we can see in 4 actual pages on this website, they are very limited. These are essentially the pages. You can also see those pages here in the front end, so you can see this website actually has a very limited amount of pages on it. And we can then say, okay, then let's only show me the posts. These are the posts that Google knows about. And categories would work obviously the same way. Let's actually remove that, only filter for categories. So now we can see the categories that Googlebot has hit and when Googlebot has hit those. So this would be important for e-commerce stores, for example. So you can see specific categories that Google has checked out on your e-commerce website. And tags and so on would obviously work in the same way. If you're only interested in pages that do not exist on your website, meaning they don't exist in your WordPress database, so URLs that Google has hit that don't exist in your WordPress database, then you would come here and you would filter for those. And you can see, obviously, because those are .html endings, those are not WordPress pages. These are, most of them would be malicious pages. But if your website has not been hacked, then it's even easier to filter through these other pages. In general, CSS files are good for Google to visit because Google needs to render your website, and Google wants to know what your website will look like on mobile phones and on desktops. And for that rendering, Google needs access to your CSS files. So don't worry about if Google is actually checking out your CSS files. Do not 410 those, meaning to set those to the page deleted status. You want to keep those. But any other pages that are, any other URLs that are not real pages on your website, you can definitely set to 410 because you don't want Google necessarily to come back and check for those pages if they are now online. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Those were the basics of server log analysis, and if you have any questions, feel free to email us via a support ticket or reach out any other way. Thank you.